Okay, Donington Park. How do you dominate at Donington Park? Like I say every time, the start of a race is obviously super important. So practice your starts, and often the only chance you get at that is your warm-up lap. And that gives you a radically different braking point when you come into Redgate for the first time. You can go so much deeper into the corner before you really need to brake, and that can often give you the advantage on passing a group of riders, something that later in the race will diminish somewhat because everybody's kind of up to speed at that point. So it's super important to practice your start. Donington Park largely hasn't changed since it's been originally built. They added on the Melbourne Loop, which is an extra length of circuit to take it up to the GP length, 2.5 miles, something like that. But the national circuit largely hasn't changed. The circuit map here, you can see the actual layout, but what makes it the national circuit is essentially when you come down the back straight, which is here, you come into what is chicane. It's the foggy chicane when you go left-right onto the Melbourne Loop. National circuit, it's right-left onto the start-finish straight. Now, the original circuit used to carry on past what is now the right-left chicane onto the start-finish straight, and you can see the original layout here, which the Melbourne circuit uses, because when you come back up from the Melbourne Loop up to Goddard's, you turn left, basically a hairpin style corner onto the start finish straight, and that uses part of the original right left of the original national circuit, and that's why when you tip into Goddard's you feel that huge negative camber, because that effectively was a cambered corner going right on the national circuit. So it's created a bit of a devil, but thankfully the national circuit, what we're talking about at the moment, it's a more natural right-left circuit onto the straight. But there in itself lies not a problem, but an extra thing. If you're kind of used to using the GP circuits, you come round Goddard's onto the start-finish straight, you've got a little bit of extra length of the straight when you use the national circuit. For a start off, when you come onto the straight using the national circuit, the left onto the straight is significantly faster than the exiting of Goddard's onto the start-finish straight, which means by the time you get to the start-finish line, you're already travelling probably 10, 15, possibly even as much as 20 miles an hour more at the same point, which means when you come into the braking zone, you're travelling that bit faster. So, as I say, if you've been used to your braking points on the GP circuit at a certain point, you have to kind of dial that back a little bit. So generally speaking, you'll probably need to brake a little bit earlier going into Redgate than on the GP circuit. It can be as much as a whole gear change difference, so it's a significant amount. And if you just go straight to your normal braking point from the GP circuit on the national circuit, you're probably going to end up out braking yourself. So it's worthwhile spending quite a bit of time re-engineering your braking point into Redgate. Some of the key features of Donington Park, you've got, let's start up with Redgate. Redgate itself, on the surface of it, appears to be a 90-degree corner, and it's relatively simple, you say, but it's not. It's slightly more than 90, and it's very easy to end up running wide there as a result, or apexing too early. You've then got Hollywood, which is the run down the first part of Craner Curves, which is a really fast flowing section. The left of Craner Curves is kind of blind as you tip into it, and as you reach the apex it all of a sudden becomes clear. So that's an important section. Old Hairpin, fast momentum sort of corner. And then you've got the run up through Starkey's Bridge and up to Swanseas Curve. Again, a really fast section of the track. You need to get comfortable about using all the full width of the track there. Then you run into McLean's, Swanseas Curve and McLean's, which is kind of like a big stretched out chicane almost. You know, you put the section together and it's essentially a chicane as opposed to two corners. You then run up the hill to the last part of the hill towards Coppice. And the entry into Coppice is the secret really, because it's a blind, you're coming onto a plateau, so it's a blind entry into the corner. And then you've got like another double apex running out, so essentially you've got like a big long opening exit corner. A lot of the speed comes from Coppice, is about being patient and not rushing the corner too much. You've then got the chicane, which is the final sort of section of Donington Park National Circuit. The right is the tightest part of the corner, so getting your entry right, and it narrows down. It really feels narrow through the chicane, and it's obviously an overtaking opportunity, but it really concertinas and tightens right up. The left, the exit, is not the same radius at all. It's a much more open radius, like going through Foggies. It's almost a mirror image of that. So the exit, the left, onto the start-finish straight is much more open and an awful lot faster. So basically, as soon as you've made the right of the chicane and the bike's going upright, it's time to go. And the machinery dependent, of course, when you come onto the start-finish straight, you go over a slight rise, a hump if you will, and that can generate a bit of a wheelie point. I'm generalising now. The curbs at Donington aren't terribly friendly. There's a few you should definitely stay off, and the one I'm talking about here is the right going through the chicane. Try not to run on that if you can. The left you can clip. You can run onto the exit curb of Redgate should you need to, but again, you're going to ultimately lose traction. And if you run a bit hot into McLean's, you can run onto the curb there a little bit as well. But again, you get too greedy and the curb does get quite rumbly and rough, and you'll again lose traction. So I'm generalising, stay off the curbs where you can. The National Circuit offers two not no overtaking's easy if you're racing against good quality riders, but two fairly simple overtaking manoeuvres, and that's going into Redgate. You've got effectively longish straight and then a run so you can get a good slipstream and then punch past somebody into Redgate, and a similar thing on the entry into the chicane. The two other overtaking manoeuvres, you have to put a lot more thought into it. You know, sometimes you get an opportunistic kind of overtake. Somebody makes a fluff or a mistake and you can jump past them. But generally speaking, the only other two places which is worth having a go from the overtaking point of view is going into the old Hairpin and after Swanseas curve going into McLean's, the right of McLean's. But you have to do a little bit of planning there and get yourself in the right position and sort of tactically punch past somebody. Opportunistically, mistakes there by riders, they're going to block your path trying to get through, so you have to be a lot more careful. So the main ones are Redgate and the entry into the chicane for overtaking. So let's have a look at Redgate on the map. Run down the start-finish area into Redgate, and then you leave Redgate, and then you set off towards Hollywood and Craner. Braking reference into Redgate it's fairly handy, is this nice big red section of tarmac, which is effectively the tarmac on the right as you're leaving the pits. I would suggest start early before you get to that point and then focus on how it feels on the braking, and you can sort of basically get further and further and further and closer towards the end of it as a braking reference. Try and not rush into the corner. It's one of the corners where it pays dividends to sort of be a little patient about entering the corner, to focus on your exit out, because it's a really fast section after Redgate. And when a corner leads onto a fast section, your exit is particularly important. There's no point in arriving in the corner sort of in a bit of a hurry, and then you have to scrub off a load more speed mid-corner because you've basically rushed into the corner, and you can't take that momentum out onto the straight with you. You have effectively a dip in your speed curve. So it's about momentum into the corner and then being patient and then get your acceleration out of the corner. So getting a good tipping point is really important. What I would suggest, the tipping point is effectively where the pit lane, the dotted line finishes, and it depends on what condition the track's in. There used to be, and sometimes there is, a white line running across the track here, which is effectively the end of the blend line. But if you utilise where the pit lane actually finishes, and just as you're rolling up to that, don't pass it and then try and tip in, but use that as a good reference to tip into the corner. Now initially that feels quite late, and if you feel I'll never get to the apex, but this is one of the reasons why you do this, because it's not a 90-degree corner, it's a little bit more than that. The apex is a little bit further round the corner than you imagine. Now what I use as the apex of the corner is this service road which comes in from the right here, the far edge of that, where that joins the track. So essentially you're looking for the curb where that tarmac section is, so that's what I would suggest to use as the apex of the corner, and utilise the end of the dotted line here as your tipping point. Now obviously up to that point it's 100% braking and you can trail the brake off into the corner. But what I would suggest to do is try and sort of be off the brakes and allow the bike to fall into the last part of the corner from, roughly speaking, sort of as the curb starts, and you're still not there yet, you're on the way in towards the curb. Try and be off the brakes by that point, so the bike's in a nice neutral state, and it allows it to fall in towards the last part of the tipping, which is up towards the apex. And just as you're rolling up to that point, pick the throttle up, balance the bike, and then develop the throttle out of the corner. So that's your entry. Now obviously the exit of the corner is all about throttle development out of the corner. So once again, using the service road where it joins the track at the curb there as the apex. Essentially, if you look at this green section of tarmac, it's quite a long section, and roughly speaking, halfway down it, that's what I would suggest is your ultimate drift out point. If you find you're on the curb or you're running up to the curb where that starts, you need to revise what you're doing, because essentially probably what you've done is you've gone in a little early into the corner, so the trajectory of the bike is kind of pointing off the track, where if you can get a little bit further around the corner, closer to where the service road starts and finishes, your trajectory is a little more kind of pointing round the corner. And what that will do, that extra little bit, will probably allow you to run out to the curb further along the curb, and you'll be able to get the bike slightly more upright and get into the drive early, because it's how quickly you can get to full throttle, because that's where the real speed, which takes you out onto a straight, or in this case down towards Hollywood. So on the approach to Redgate, utilising the red section of tarmac, and if they're there, because sometimes the cars knock them off, the little countdown markers, the little tiny countdown markers, because technically you shouldn't ride on that, and these are to stop people riding on it, not that you'd want to, but you can start to use that. So you're better off starting using early, maybe the guy's deck chair if it's still there, but either way it's a great opportunity and a big visual thing that you can utilise. So keep over to the left, using the dotted line here where it finishes. Don't get to the line and then try and tip into the corner. As you're coming up to the end of the line, as you come into the end of this line, start to turn away from it, but don't rush across the track. Try and leave it as sort of as late as you can for that late tipping. Now tactically that can be a little bit of a weakness. I'm talking about at the moment the fastest way around the track. If you're leading a group of riders and they're fairly close, you've not broke the toe, you might want to tip in a little bit earlier, because what you need to do is narrow down the gap, narrow down the opportunity of a rider coming underneath you. Maybe even be 2, 3, 4 metres out in the track when you're coming down the straight here, because that will really confuse them as to what you're ultimately trying to do. Having said that, if you tip in early or you've moved away from the edge of the left-hand side of the track, essentially you're going to be down on speed through the corner, so you're effectively going to lose time. But if you're trying to maintain track position, where you are in the race, that may be more important than actually going fast. There's no point in trying to go fast, staying over to the left and letting 1 or 2 bikes through, because you've got to then repass them or get involved in a fight to get back where you were. So it's a little bit of a balancing act. Easing back off the brakes as you're starting to close into the curb. The service road on the right here, this is kind of what I'm using as the apex. At this point in the track, I still haven't opened the throttle. I'm letting the bike still finish off the entry into the corner, and more or less as that flashes past my peripheral vision is where I pick the throttle up and think about developing the throttle out onto the straight. My trajectory is good. I'm not pointing over to the left here. I'm kind of pointing more where I need to be, towards the marshal's post in the distance, and then develop the throttle out of the corner and onto the run down towards Hollywood and Craner Curve. So back to the map, we're going to look now at the run down through Hollywood and Craner Curves. I'm not going to lie to you, it's a pretty scary section of the track. It's very high speed. It's basically probably on a lot of bikes you're talking about 120-ish mile an hour through this section, possibly slightly more if you're super brave. The track feels like a constant radius, but as you can see here by the satellite image, you've effectively got like a 50 pence piece. you've got like little parts of the track. So if you're trying to follow the edge of the track, the right hand side of the track going down the hill, what you'll tend to find is you'll be up and down, up and down, up and down. So what you've got to try and do, and the first part of it from Redgate to more or less the second curb, it's obviously machinery dependent here. On a super mono it's pretty much flat out till you get to that second curb. But essentially from leaving the end of the rumble strip and the curb on the left hand side here, don't immediately try and flash across the right hand side of the track. Progressively, while the bike's accelerating, start to ease the bike in, bit more, bit more, bit more. The first curb that you see, because there's essentially three apexes. You've got an apex roughly there, you've got a second apex which is the first curb, and then you've got a third apex which is the second curb. Are we all following this? Leaving the curb or the left hand side of the track here, at the first kink, which it's difficult to identify, the first proper thing that you see, a visual clue that you see, is this first curb, which is the second apex essentially. Generally speaking, I'm probably about 1.5 meters, 2 meters out in the track at that point. My aim is to end up right at the end of this curb here, right on the curb. And from the end of the curb there, right the way to that point, is a constantly slightly more lean, slightly more lean, slightly more lean as I'm kind of going round the corner. It's one radius, but because you're increasing the speed, that radius becomes more lean. It's a weird one. If you leave the tip in too late, if you're in the middle of the track sort of running past the first curb here, it's going to be probably a bit of a struggle to get to the right hand side of the track at the second curb, and that's super important. And the problem with being in the middle of the track there is you've effectively got to really get the bike on its side. But because you're going really fast at that point, the wheels are turning round. When a bike's going fast, it's really hard to change direction. The bike, you're sort of fighting the bike. Going through a chicane where you've no speed, the bike flicks about quite easy because the wheel speed's relatively slow. But because you're going really fast, the bike feels like you've wound the steering damper right up, and it's a real hard bit of a chew basically to get in there. So having that constant radius corner as you're accelerating, it allows you to sort of need to put less effort to get the bike into the right hand side of the track. That essentially gets us to that second curb there. At the end of that curb is where I'm trying to get the bike to. Now again, machinery dependent. If you're on a really low capacity bike or something which isn't very quick, this next section you probably won't even need to lift off. You know, your 125s, your Super Sport 400s, all that sort of thing. You don't really need to lift. Your CB500, it's just full gas going through this section. More heavier bikes and bikes which are a little bit faster, it may be an idea here to ease back on the throttle. And what that does is it transfers a little bit of weight on the front of the bike because you're going to use a lot of counter steer. Now from this part, from this apex here, you can't actually see the left-hand apex because it's kind of going over a slight crest, and you've got a camber change to get past as well. So you have to sort of be progressive in how you change direction, and then eventually you'll start to, because you can't see the apex until you're almost there. So you have to get the timing of this right. If you change direction too quickly, you're going to apex far too early. If you change direction too slowly, you're not going to make the apex at all. So it's about matching your ground speed with how quickly you change direction. And eventually you get into kind of a rhythm, a nice rhythm, and you realise as I go past the end of the curb there, if I do that at that speed, I'm going to make the curb. But one of the things I would strongly suggest here is try not to go through the left and onto the short straight down to the old hairpin. Try not to go through there on a closed throttle. The reason is, what I believe, is as you go over, there's a slight crest. Let's take some of this off here now. Roughly speaking, from the apex there to that apex there, around where that curb starts there, there's a camber change. You're going from a positive camber change going right to a positive camber change left. So somewhere between the two, you're going over the crest of a camber. And while that's happening, it can really affect grip levels with the front end. So ideally put a little bit of weight on the front end by rolling the throttle back. You don't have to close the throttle, roll the throttle back. It'll put a bit more weight on the front wheel, which will give you more purchase when you're using your counter steer. And at the same time, weight up the inside when you go left, the left hand footrest, to help to get the bike moving. So you're not relying totally on counter steer. Use your body mass and the weight to the footrest to get the bike to change direction, and aim to basically be on a positive throttle when you're going through the left-hand curve of Craner. As soon as you pass the curb, essentially the track doesn't level out, but it flattens out slightly on the run down towards the hairpin. The really steep part of the hill is from the second curb to the left of the apex. That's the steepest part of the hill. As you go past the left-hand apex of Craner, you're on a positive throttle. Drive out. Now that drive out might put you out into kind of the middle of the track. Now at this point you're thinking, I've got to get over to the left-hand side, ready for the old hairpin, which is correct. But if you look at the circuit here, there's actually a kink going slightly to the right. If you're in the middle of the track there, what you've done is you've created a nice radius through the corner. Don't go through the left and try and stay on the left, because effectively what you've done is you've tightened that radius up, which is making the bike work harder than it needs to. Use the track. You don't have to go out to the right hand side, but it's there if you need to. But use the kind of the middle of the track, and then basically keep turning left. And what that'll do, it'll help, because of that little right kink before you get to the old hairpin, it's much easier then to get over to the left hand side of the track. You don't want to be over the left hand side of the track at say that point on the track, because you've wasted what Craner Cares offers, which is a real high speed left-hander. Again, it's a machinery dependent thing. After you go past the apex and you drive out, you know, imagine come out of a left onto a straight, you're going to accelerate, so accelerate down towards the old hairpin. But then of course you're going to have to come into the braking zone. You're going to have to get rid of some speed before you go into the old hairpin. But drive to a brake, as opposed to kind of just shut the throttle and kind of roll down the corner, because any time that you're effectively coasting is an opportunity to either accelerate and then brake. But coasting is you're stretching out your timeline, you're really wasting time by coasting. Coasting is bad. It's like being on the grass, it's not good. Generally speaking, drive to a brake. And that drive to a brake, what it automatically then does is creates a reference, and you can start to use something. It could be a skid mark, the end of a curb, the start of a gravel patch, anything. There's something that you can utilise usually as a braking reference. But because we're talking about a range of machines here, where that happens, you're going to have to effectively find it yourself at the end of the day. But the Super Mono, for instance, I go flat through the left there, and then roughly speaking where the end of that curb is there is my kind of rollback, and then a short period of heavy braking to get the bike over to the left hand side of the track. And as soon as I get to the left hand side of the track, which is in the middle of that curb there, as I get to the middle of the curb, I start to release the brake and let the bike run into the old hairpin. I don't trail brake into the old hairpin. Effectively I do a heavy-ish brake to get rid of some of the big speed, reach the middle of that curb, trail the brake off for a very short time, and then release the brake and let the bike run in towards the old hairpin. So let's have a look what that looks like in reality. So leaving Redgate on the run down towards or through Hollywood. I'm not quite sure where Hollywood finishes and Craner starts, but it's effectively Hollywood then Craner. I'm still effectively, the curb's finished, but I'm effectively still more or less over the left hand side of the track. As you can see by the angle, I've started the tip in. Not rushing to get across the track here. Effectively passing the first of those little kinks. If I was on the right hand side of the track, I would find the track has kind of came out and then disappeared again because of the kink. But I'm essentially aiming now for the first of the curbs. Should soon come into view. You can just see it now. The angle hasn't changed. I'm in a constant radius running down the hill. I'm still accelerating. I passed that curb by probably 1.5 meters, 2 meters. Still accelerating. The track here goes away a little bit, because remember the 50p piece, you've got a slight flat part. And because it goes away, you think, oh God, I'm drifting out. Well, you sort of are, but the curb's going to come back. If you stay on that radius, eventually you'll come back to the second curb. See, the second curb comes into view. And where the curb finishes, that's basically this last white section is what I'm aiming for. And as soon as I get to that point, you can see the bike's just started to come upright. I've now got to match up how fast I'm going forward to how quickly I change direction. What I'll do is roll the throttle ever so slightly. I won't be full gas through here, because if you're on full gas, often you can take weight off the front wheel. Again, machinery dependent. So I've started my change of direction, and as you can see, you can't even see the left-hander at all because of that the camber change, and there's a imperceivable kind of crest. And remember, when you're on a bike and you're leaning over, you're actually, your head, when you walk in the circuit, you can actually almost see the apex because you're standing, I don't know, 5.5, 6 feet, depending on how tall you are. But when you're on your bike and you're leant over here and you're leaning over to the right, your head's probably only about 3 foot off the floor. So your vision starts to narrow down what you can actually see in the distance. But again, look as far as your head as you can. That's really important. So start to change your direction. More or less, as soon as I've changed direction, the curb obviously comes into view. As soon as that happens, I come back on the throttle, so I know now I'm maintaining pace through there. And as I reach the apex, I then go back to sort of properly driving and drive out and use the kind of the width of the track. I go about 1/2 to 3/4 usually. More or less where the curb finishes here, there's a countdown marker there if you want to use that one, but more or less where the curb finishes there, that's where I start to roll the throttle off and come into the braking. And I'm now bringing the bike over to the left hand side of the track. So I'm using the straight between the left of the Craner curves and the old hairpin, that straight section. I don't go round left, go upright and then turn right. I'm using the entire straight to bring the bike over to the left to immediately turn right. If you look at the bike here, there's no period where the bike's upright for any amount of time. It basically goes left, 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 right, 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 right. As soon as I get to the middle of that curb, and you don't always have to be right on it, but the further over you are, the more that open radius of the old hairpin comes. Now, as you can see by the radius of it here, it's much more of a corner, even though it's a fast corner, than running down through Craner curves, which are really long. They're like motorway corners. They're really sort of fast and flowing. So this is what you would have to say is a definite corner as opposed to a curve. I don't know where the definition between the two starts and ends, but this is definitely a corner. Coming from the left-hand side of the track, roughly speaking, in the middle of the curve there, that's your kind of your tipping point. I've done the majority of my braking on the run up to that point, so between the tipping point and the apex of the old hairpin itself, effectively from there to there, I trail the brake off. But what I like to do, what I really feel confident about doing, is before I get to the apex, be on a constant throttle so the bike's nice and planted. I always feel that when the throttle's open, just broke the seal, as it were, of the injector, you're not trying to accelerate, you're just letting the bike settle. You're flattening the back tyre out slightly, and you know what the grip feels like when you sort of tap the throttle on. You know you've got grip. So the development of the throttle after that can start almost immediately. So I like to be on the throttle before I get to the hairpin apex itself, and then I can focus then on driving out using the full width of the track, because it's so important. This is the lowest part of the circuit, and from here it's uphill all the way basically to Coppice. It's not a steep climb, but if you were on a push bike, it would be hard work pedalling up this hill all the way up to Coppice. So it's a definite hill. And on, again, smaller, lower capacity bikes, that kind of really saps the power. So it's super important that you try and carry as much momentum as possible. You can grab a little bit of curb on the exit if you needed to. So use the full width of the track there coming out. From exiting the curb on the left-hand side of the track of the old hairpin, you've got this kink here. This is where Starkey's bridge. Now the bridge used to go right the way across, but it's long ago gone now, but I think the curve is still called Starkey's. Most bikes you can go pretty much flat through it. On the really big stuff you'll accelerate hard from the drift out point there, and you might have to ease back as you're running through the corner and then pick up the throttle out on effectively the long straight stroke curve up towards Swans. Smaller stuff, and the super monos for instance, from the drift out point there, it's flat out right the way up the hill. But either way, make it from the left hand side of the track. You don't particularly need to get right over to the right hand side. Generally speaking, the middle of the track is enough, and then make sure you just clip the edge of the curb there. This is one curb which theoretically you can use, but the curb's actually lower, believe it or not. It doesn't stand up, it's like in a slight dip. So if you ran across the curb, you drop down and you bounce back up again. So it's not a pleasant thing to do, but it is doable should you need to. But either way, clip the curb there and then allow the bike to drift out going up towards Starkey's. Again, this is a machinery dependent thing. On the smaller stuff which hasn't got physically enough speed, you could probably be in the middle of the track here coming up here. And if you're in the middle of the track coming up the hill, you're deterring anybody trying to go past you on the left and they think should I go around the outside of you. It kind of confuses them a little bit. With more speed and power, you're naturally going to be thrown over to the right hand side of the track here, so any overtaking is going to happen coming up the inside of you here. Going into Swanseas curve here, which is the left, there's an element of defensiveness that you've got to do there, because as you tip into the corner you could have someone who's slipstreamed you going up the hill and they kind of try to get underneath you. I would call it a narrowing vector. As you tip into the corner, you're going to narrow that gap down, so it's a really tough pass to do, and it's a massive commitment thing. And this is one of the overtaking manoeuvres I talked about briefly at the start of the video. You're better off, if you're closing up on somebody there, you're better off biding your time and get really close to them as you run through the left, so as you straighten up and go into McLean's, you can fire underneath them then. That's kind of a much safer option from the overtaking point of view than trying to get underneath somebody going through the left of Swanseas curve. Swanseas curve and McLean's, you can see the radius here. That's obviously a much more open, faster corner, and it's incredibly quick going through that corner, where McLean's, effectively the radius kind of tightens up. It's a definite corner, if you will. The track is effectively up, still climbing. As you get to McLean's, the exit of McLean's, it kind of levels out for a short time, and then you've got another bit of a climb to get you up to Coppice. So essentially the track at the exit here kind of levels out. What that means is when you're on the approach to McLean's here and you're looking into the corner, you can't really see the exit until you're sort of running round the corner, and then all the curbs and the corner really pops into view. So there's a lot of sort of commitment at this point. But what I tend to try and think about, how I think about this corner, is sort of like a really big chicane. Any chicane, if you think about it, you've got to think about, well, what's the best way to get from entering the chicane to leaving the chicane? What's the best way to do that? Do I need a fast exit? Do I need a fast entry? So obviously here, because of the radius of the corner, it's a fast entry into the corner, and that sometimes can affect how you leave the corner. What I would suggest here, obviously from the tipping point, which is way before the end of the curb, don't get to the end of the curb and expect that to be a tipping point. You're just not going to make the apex. Before you get to that little road, and certainly before the end of the curb, you're really motoring through this corner. And again, it's a machinery dependent thing. The Super Mono, for instance, I'm pretty much flat gas until I've just passed the apex of the corner there. So I've tipped in and I've kept the throttle on, run into the corner. Your smaller stuff, your 125s, 250s, 350TZs, that sort of thing, you're pretty much flat to that point. Your super bikes and your bigger stuff where you're physically travelling faster up the straight or up the hill towards Swanseas curve, you may kind of roll off as you're kind of approaching this corner, but still the apex is a really good reference to actually physically shut the throttle and start your braking. Obviously, fast corner, big angle of lean where you come into the braking zone, which is effectively at the apex of that corner. Your braking isn't 100% braking, because at big lean like that you've got to be progressive with the braking, so you'll come on the brakes as a squeeze, and then as the bike's coming upright, sort of as you're transitioning from the left over to the right, you can develop that into a really hard brake for a short period of time, and then as you go into the right you trail the brake off. So your braking is like a percentage which increases and then decreases. It's not like a bang the brake on and trail it off. It's a sort of increase the brake like a wave and then decrease it as you drop into the corner. Now the faster you go through this corner, the more naturally you're going to end up over towards the right hand side of the track. From a tactical point of view is good, because you're diminishing anybody's opportunity to overtake, but in the same breath it completely screws up your exit to the corner, so you're going to really lose out coming out the corner. So defensively it's good, from a speed perspective it's bad. I've seen people ease back going through this corner so they can get right over to the left hand side of the track, with a theory then of opening the radius up so they can go really fast round the corner. But the problem is they create a massive opening for anyone who's behind them to make a very, very easy pass. So both from a tactical point of view and a speed point of view, I suggest when the bike's physically upright, because you go left, keep going left for a while, and then basically swap over to the right. Think of a chicane. When the bike's in the upright phase where you're maximum braking, I would suggest middle of the track, generally speaking, is a really good position to end up with the bike, more or less in the middle of the track. The curb itself, it's not terribly obvious, but there's a bit of a lump as the curb starts, and there's a second lump as the curb finishes. What's really important is to try and end up at the end of the curb, that second lump which comes out, that's kind of the true apex of the corner. Now if you get it right, you can be really close to the first hump, and then the curb will kind of go away from you and then comes back to you because it's got a slight flat in it. So don't try and have your knee on the curb all the way around, because it's not going to work unless you've got a very long stretchy knee. But the end of the curb is the real thing to try and get the bike, because what that does is it gives you the biggest opening between the apex there and the drift out point. If you've apexed, let's say you've gone round there and as soon as you've seen the curb, you've fired the bike in and you've apexed right on there, the trajectory is kind of like that. So you're going to make a bit of a pig's ear of your exit. So if you're still changing direction as you're closing in on that, so you get to the second apex, your trajectory is obviously more like that. So it just allows you to finish the corner off better. It does open you up for a little bit of an attack here, somebody who's really mega committed to getting underneath you there. But on the assumption that isn't the case, it's obviously the fastest way to get round the corner. As soon as you pass that second bump, it's about developing the throttle out onto the short straight, which takes you up to McLean's. So let's have a look what that looks like in real life. So putting those sections together, which is effectively the old Hairpin, Starkey's Bridge up to Swanseas and McLean's, putting that whole section, because what you find at Donington is it's such a kind of flowy track. If you get one section or one corner wrong, it naturally impacts the next section. So, and it sometimes takes a while to get back online and get back in the kind of groove. So having a nice flowing kind of rhythm is super important. So out to the left, pick up the throttle before I get to the apex. As I pass the apex, go into drive, use the full width of the track, out towards the right hand side. Again, half to 3/4 is all you need to do. Full gas now, the curb will flash past us here, full width of the track up towards Swanseas curve. Way before you get to the end of the curb, commit into the corner. Coming up to Swanseas itself, as soon as you apex, off the throttle, pick up the brake, keep the bike turning left. Roughly speaking, I'm in the middle of the track now while I'm transitioning. I'm now really hard on the brake. Fairly rapid change of direction, but I'm not trying to fire the bike into the corner now. I'm still trailing the brake off. The first lump of the curb is here. I'm close, but I'm not completely on it. I'm off the brakes by now. Pick the throttle up just before I get to the second bump in the curb, quite close to it, and then develop the throttle out onto the short straight up towards Coppice. Okay, let's go back to the map and have a look at Coppice. So Coppice, round McLean's, short straight, slowly climbing up towards Coppice itself. The apex of Coppice is only a very short curb and it kind of really jumps out at you, but the problem is you can't really even see that curb on the run up the hill. It's all kind of, you're coming onto a plateau, so it's kind of like you're going over a rise. It's like a humpback bridge, you just can't really see the other side. So it's all about previous experience and developing references that you can use, being sort of committed in the best way. But the control element's important. It's obviously full gas up the short straight towards the end of the curb, but not at the end of the curb. A relatively short, hard brake, and then a commitment, and then trail the brake off. Make sure you're off the brake before you get to the apex. Please don't trail the brake up to the apex, because if you're braking going over that rise and still trying to slow down to get to the apex, you're asking an awful lot for the front tyre. And the amount of times that people lose the front there and end up sat in the gravel wondering what the hell happened. Even if you're going a little bit fast going in towards the apex, is get off the brakes, because you can always run out right to the left hand side of the track and kind of recover the situation should you need to. And in a sense, that's kind of what you do. So heavy short brake there, trail the brake off as you're tipping in towards the apex of the corner. From the apex, it's like going over a rise, and it flattens out. As you go past the apex, you kind of let the bike settle. While you're letting the bike settle, you should have to be a little bit patient. The bike can drift out into sort of half or 3/4 in the track. And then when you realise I've made it, you pick the throttle up and then start to develop it, and aim really to try and get back to that second apex. But because the radius is such a big, long, open corner, on most bikes, certainly the lower capacity bikes, by the time you've got to the, that sort of settling down point and you're in middle or slightly over to the left hand side of the track on the exit of the tight bit, essentially you can pick the throttle up and develop it fairly quickly to full gas onto the straight. It's obviously a machine dependent sort of thing here. The important bit is obviously the apex, that curb which kind of flashes underneath you, and allow the bike to settle as it drifts out. Some bikes, what I tend to do here is that the gear I come up the hill in, I actually don't change down. I stay in that same gear because it feels like when you've drifted out past the apex and you've drifted out into the track, it feels like you should have changed down because I need to accelerate hard now. But the fact is you're at full lean when you're drifting out there, so you can't really use full throttle. So you're better off having the bike in a nice calm state and you sort of drive the bike out. If you're racing a TZ or a RS125 or something like that, which is quite peaky, you unfortunately do have to go for the lower gear and then just kind of develop the throttle as safely as you can in that high rev range and then shift through the gears onto the straight. If you're riding something with a bit more torque and a bit more sort of grunty sort of power, it's a safer option to stay in that effectively higher gear and drive round the first part of the corner, developing the throttle, and then if you need to change gear, wait till you're sort of further round the corner and use the full width of the track onto the straight. There's many a time I go round this corner and I don't apex at that second curb. I'm kind of in the middle of the track there, but as long as you're staying on the tarmac and the throttle's fully open, it really doesn't make too much difference. The corner's nice and open. It kind of lessens off the radius as you get further around the corner. So don't panic and be patient in the first part and then focus on your drive and get the bike onto the back straight. So let's have a look what that looks like in real time. So a short straight, it's more or less flat, the track here, and as you can see from almost the start of the curb on the left here, there's like a short sharp incline to get you towards Coppice. Keep over the left hand side of the track, full gas up the hill, machinery dependent, you've got to have to find something, and it's very bland, the track here. It's really difficult to get a reference, but usually there's something that you can find here which is a good reference for you to brake. So it's a heavy brake to start with. As you can see, you can't see the apex, you can't see anything at the tipping point. So it's all about finding a confident place so you can ease the brake off as you start to tip in and commit to the corner. You've got to really commit before you see the apex. Now if you throw the bike in too early or too aggressively here, you're going to effectively apex too early and you're going to have to sit up. The corner's ruined. If you're too late tipping in, you may find you have to tip in even more aggressively and then you run the risk of losing the front. So it's finding a comfortable progressive tip in which allows you to get from the left hand curb over to the apex curb. You only see the apex curb just before you get there. You're probably 5 to 10 metres away from it and the curb kind of jumps out at you. As soon as I go past the curb, the bike starts to run out towards the left hand side of the track, so I'm probably half or 3/4 in the track. I've already picked the throttle up here. I've stayed in that same gear that I've went up the hill in and then developed the throttle out onto the straight. On the smaller lower capacity bikes, the throttle development is much more of a roll it on and get it onto full throttle. The big bikes, it's much more about being progressively develop the bike because you're going to struggle for grip at the end of the day. And then it's onto the back straight. Now remember, you're at the national circuit, so we're going to turn right at the end. I've seen people all too many times and they make a god-awful mistake. They go down the back straight and they've switched into like what the track they normally go is through Foggies, which is left and right. And I've seen people going down the right-hand side of the track here on full commitment. And what I tend to do then is just back off because I know they've just lost the plot completely. So left-hand side of the track and keep it over to the left past the museum here. So let's have a look at the chicane. Okay, the chicane, as you can see by this view we've got here, effectively going past the museum, what should be on the left hand side of the track, machinery dependent, your braking reference is going to change enormously. Your big bikes and your fast stuff, you'll be effectively braking more or less halfway down the museum, quite close really to where the curb starts. On the less power, less speed, you can get much closer to the corner. So your reference for braking is something you're going to have to kind of build up yourself. But effectively, we're on the left-hand side of the track here. You can see Foggies is obviously left-right, the national circuit is right-left. They're more or less mirror images of each other. From my experience, the left-right is a faster corner, it's more open, you get better vision, the whole thing is slightly faster. Going right-left here, it looks it and it certainly feels as you're going through it, it kind of funnels down and it's quite tight through there. The focus is the first apex, the right-hand apex, it's getting to that point. So finding a point of heavy braking, trail the brake off into the corner and be off the brakes just before you get to the apex. So it's about killing all the speed to get you to that point. The radius of the left, as you can see, is a lot more open than the right. So effectively, as soon as you've made that right-hand apex and you're just starting to sit the bike up, fairly quickly develop the throttle, and by the time you get to the left curve, the apex of the left, you can be pretty deep into the throttle accelerating, again machinery dependent, and then full gas out of the corner. So effectively, don't think of the left onto the straight as another corner. It's just a kink leading onto the straight. The corner is the right, that's the thing that you've got to focus on making. The right over to the left is more like a curve or kink, is something that you pass to get you onto the straight, and you kind of drive through it out onto the straight. Now there is a slight incline here where we're going through Foggies, it's absolutely flat. Here you sort of drop ever so slightly down to the apex of the left, and then it's a slight climb onto the start-finish straight. And when you come to the curb is quite rough and bumpy, so I would suggest stay off it. But where the curb starts, there is a little bit of a wheelie point there, so the bigger, more powerful stuff, you may find that you have a bit of an issue with the wheelie. TZs, 250, 350s, you tend to find they wheelie the hell here because of the nature of the power of the bike, but all it needs is a little bit of a lip to get the things moving. But just be aware of that. This curb here, have a run across it. Use about half of the red and white curb if you need to. It's rough, but because you're actually accelerating, or the theory is you should be kind of accelerating through that, you're taking weight off the front wheel, so that the bike will kind of may flap around a little bit as you run across it, but you can straight line the corner a little bit more. Experiment, I would suggest, with that running over the curb there. Don't be too greedy, because you run to the left of the curb and you're close to the green bit, the curb's quite aggressive. You can sort of, I think the term is, you can nick a bit of curb there, but just be careful. And if you're not that bothered about it, avoid the curb, but you can nick a bit of the curb, and it just allows you to straighten that up a little bit more onto the start-finish straight. When it comes towards the end of the race, if you've not made your pass going in here, you've probably lost it, because the start-finish line is not that far down the start-finish straight. If you realise that you're not going to get somebody, they're particularly good on the brakes, and it's the last lap scenario, you're sometimes better off letting them think you're right behind them and let them go bonkers into the corner, because the problem is they will probably then cock up their exit. So you going into that corner, then you can control your entry better because you're not tactically trying to pass them at the left. So you can focus on being a little bit of a gap between you and them as you go through the left, which means you can get onto the throttle earlier and get that drive onto the straight, so you can actually try and out-drag them down on the short run to the start-finish. So in practice, if you get the opportunity, practice mega-death braking, so if you're leading a race, you can get to that point first. But also practice being fairly calm and collected going through the corner, and then focus on a super fast exit. So it's like slower in, faster out, and that's your drag to the line, or super fast in and you're not really bothered about coming out, to make sure you're leading a group of riders or another rider, so you stand probably more chance of getting the run to the line. You've got a couple of options there. So let's have a look what that looks like in real life. Obviously down the straight, coming towards the museum here on the left. Braking references, you can use these doors here on the left hand side because they're nicely parted, constant sort of distance, and you can potentially use the curb on the right hand side. There isn't a curb on the left, which is a bit unfortunate, so you can utilise either the doors, because the wall itself is a little bit bland, or the curb itself as a braking reference. You can see it's one mark on the start of the curb as the braking. I've seen lots of people here in a kind of a panic scenario. They're doing a super late braking, and when you're in that sort of panicky sort of mode, the tendency, as soon as you hit the brakes, you start going effectively in towards the corner, And effectively what you're doing, your commitment point where you commit to going to the corner. I've seen people in the middle of the track, and of course they have a really tight radius to make, where if you've managed to be super late on the brakes and do a fairly late tipping, you've got a bigger radius so you can enter the corner faster, which means from the apex of the left to the apex of the right, you can naturally carry more speed across there, as opposed to reduce a load of speed to get you to the right hand apex, and then that compromises your speed to the left. So you're trying to carry speed through the corner, is that open radius running in there. So stay to the left and a late tipping, trailing the brake off to a 0 before you get to the apex. As soon as you reach the curb, the corner you've made, it's now about getting the bike rapidly change direction, picking the throttle up, driving through the corner. As soon as you pass the second apex, the left hand apex, they sort of developing full gas onto the straight. So it's about how much confidence you got in the change of direction and the picking and driving through the left onto the straight. And that's Donington Park for you. I really enjoy Donington. The track surface is, generally speaking, like a billiard table. It's one of the smoothest tracks we're going to go to. Some of the curbs aren't great, but you can give them a go should you want to. Practice your starts, super important, and then get comfortable with using the track where you need to. I hope this helps. Come and say hello at Donington if you see me.